Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Sedgwick Brand Protection European Product Safety and Recall Index webinar for the first quarter of 2025 as we preview data from the latest report and examine the recent regulatory trends. My name is Chris Ockleshaw. Most of you will be familiar with me from some of our past webinars, but if you are new, to introduce myself, I'm an international recall consultant at Sedgwick Brand Protection, which is our product recall and crisis response division, and my role is helping our clients in the scoping of product recalls and other crisis-related events to support with notifying consumers and pulling potentially dangerous products off the market. Mark Buckingham, who usually joins us, is currently visiting some of our clients and partners in Australia. So I'm delighted to say that we have Hannah Hunter joining us today for the first time to help us dissect some of the data. So Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chris. Hi all, I'm Hannah. I am Director of Client Services and Operations here at Sedgwick. I oversee delivery and execution of all recall events internationally across all operational functions. Nice to be speaking with you all today. Also joining us for today's webinar is my colleague Rachel. Rachel, over to you.
Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Rachel Quinn and I'm a senior account manager here with Sedgwick. So my role involves overseeing the launch of new recall campaigns and being a dedicated point of contact for our clients.
Fantastic, thank you both. So now today's webinar is focused on the United Kingdom and European Union regions. We'll focus on 5 product categories, which are automotive, food and beverage, pharmaceutical, medical device, and then consumer products. And then we'll break consumer products category into 3 regulatory areas, which is AI and technology, markets and trade, and then sustainability. The report is based on data we collect from safety regulators and government agencies across the EU and the UK, and it offers an overview of legislative actions and insights from our legal partners and other regulatory experts. But before we dive into each industry, we want to let you know about a brand new online resource that we've created. And it's based upon our 30 years of global recall experience. So we've developed the first interactive recall readiness audit to help you evaluate the strength of your recall procedures and preparedness to withstand a product incident or crisis. It features 15 quick yes or no questions, and it will take less than 2 minutes to complete. And then upon completion, you'll receive a personalized recall readiness score, along with a detailed report offering tailored recommendations based on your responses. So it will help you to proactively enhance your crisis response. So if you just follow the QR code that's on the screen now, you'll be able to uncover your results right away. And then also just a quick reminder that today's index is part 2 of a series. So our US colleagues held a webinar for the US Recall Index last week. If you missed that presentation, it is available on playback. So you can simply scan the QR code on the screen now to watch that one back on demand. And we definitely recommend that one, particularly if you have operations or any part of your supply chain in the US. So without further ado, let me pass things over now to Hannah for an overview of the Q1 recall data.
Thank you, Chris. The total number of recalls in the UK and EU across all of the categories we monitor have been consistently rising over the past 11 years. In Q1, we hit an 11-year high with 3,925 product recalls across all the categories and subcategories that we track. Last quarter is the 5th consecutive quarter with more than 3,500 recalls. Of the 5 categories and 3 subcategories that we monitor, 4 of them saw recalls increase quarter over quarter. Both the electronics and automotive sectors experienced 11-year highs, and recalls in the clothing industry rose by 123%, with the toy sector increasing 29.9%. The food and beverage, pharmaceutical and medical device industries also all experienced fewer recalls compared to last quarter. However, most of the changes were moderate. The number of pharmaceutical recalls dropped by 8.8%, and there were 8.7% fewer medical device recalls too. And the number of food and beverage events fell by 14.5% in Q1 this year. Now, let me hand over to Rachel to take us through what's going on across sectors.
Thank you. So US tariffs were top of mind across all industries, with the fluctuating positions and ongoing negotiations straining supply chain planning. The uncertainty will continue into the second quarter and most likely beyond this. AI and sustainability continue to be key issues for European regulators. Both the EU and UK are implementing new AI frameworks. The two jurisdictions are also exploring how to make their economies greener, with changes across multiple sectors, including agriculture and packaging. The EU is also working to implement changes to close competitiveness gaps and other measures to improve fair trade practices in the food and beverage, automotive, and medical device sectors, among others. Now, over to Chris to take a closer look at each industry.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So to kick off each sector, we will ask a question to test your knowledge. So you'll see a pop-up on the right-hand side of your screen where you can record your answer, and we'll start with the automotive sector. So the first question is, in April, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer announced that the deadline to phase out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars under the zero-emission vehicle mandate would be delayed to make it easier for the industry to transition to electric vehicles. So the question is, what is the new target date? Your options are A, 2040, B, 2035, or C, 2030. And I'll give you all just a moment there to make your selections, and we will come back to the results very shortly. Okay, so the automotive industry is one of the hardest hit sectors in the current tariff battle taking place between the US and the rest of the world. So as of mid-April, the US had imposed a 25% tariff on imported vehicles, and more duties took effect in May on automotive parts in addition to tariffs on imported steel and aluminium. The European Commission introduced its Industrial Action Plan for the European automotive sector in March, and the strategy provides a range of financial and policy initiatives to boost the EU automotive industry and promote innovation. Okay, so if we head back now quickly to the poll question there, and I can confirm that the answer was in fact B, so by the end of 2035. So well done to you if you guessed correctly there. I can see actually that 59% of you were correct in that as well. So well done if you were one of those. Okay, let's move over to some of the data, Hannah.
Thank you. So there was a 26.5% increase in automotive recalls across the EU and the UK from Q4 2024 to Q1 2025. The number of events rose from 196 last quarter to 148 this past quarter, which, as previously stated, is an 11-year high. There were 191 recalls tied to injuries as a standalone cause in Q1, which was the leading automotive hazard this quarter. Fire risk was the second most common recall risk, which was linked to 47 events in Q1, reaching its highest quarterly level in over a decade. This was followed by environmental hazards, which were cited in 4 recalls as the sole cause. As a reminder to you all, we share a lot more data about each industry in the full Product Safety and Recall Index report. Now we'll pause for a moment to see if there is any questions on the automotive industry. So if there are any, please do pop them in the chat and we will get back to that.
Yeah, please do post any questions that you have. We do often get some questions submitted in advance as well of the session. So one that was submitted last week that I thought I would present today. So the question was, following the recent ruling by the Court of Justice of the European Union that broadens the definition of producer, what steps should automotive manufacturers be taking? So I did a little bit of research on this last week, and from my understanding, the court's ruling creates additional liability risks for automotive distributors. So even if they're not the manufacturer or of a defective vehicle. So therefore, our advice from Sedgwick would be for manufacturers and suppliers to review their recall plans so that they can act quickly in the event of a defective product and then be diligent in their supply chain planning as well. And this topic actually is discussed in a bit more detail in the full index report, which you can read later on today.
Now on to the food and beverage sector. And first, of course, we have our question. The UK government is developing a land use framework that it claims will protect farmland and food security while boosting the economy and restoring the natural world. Under the draft proposal, how much current agricultural land will be taken away by 2050? Is it A, 10%, B, 25%, or C, 6%? So we can make your choices on the screen, and I'll just give everyone a moment to make their choices. And moving on to the trends in the food and beverage sector. The European food and beverage industry is one of the many sectors that is facing uncertainty amidst ongoing tariff threats by the US and possible retaliatory tariffs by the EU and UK. A range of exported food and agricultural products and imported US products could face higher prices or lower demand. EU farmers are getting a boost from regulators with two proposed regulatory changes. One of these changes would amend a current rule that establishes a common market organisation for agricultural products, and the other would introduce measures to improve cross-border enforcement within EU member states and protect against unfair trading practices. So now to go back to the answer to our question and then into the latest food industry data. So under the UK government's land use framework proposal, how much current agricultural land will be taken away by 2050? And the answer is A, 10%. So farmers have raised concerns saying that land allocated for use solely for climate and environmental benefits could be shared with responsible agricultural production. And looking at the results, so we have 21% went with 6%, 30% went with 25%, and 48% of you got that answer right with 10%. And now we have the data for food and beverage.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So in Q1, regulators in the EU and the UK reported a total of 1,242 food and beverage recalls. So that was down 14.5% from the 10-year quarterly high of 1,452 in Q4 of last year. The leading cause of recalls in this sector was non-bacterial contamination, with 550 events, and the most common contaminant was aflatoxins, linked to 135 recalls. The second leading concern across the food and beverage sector was bacterial contamination, cited in 237 recalls, and salmonella was the most common bacterial risk, tied to 174 recalls. The third leading reason for recalls was undeclared allergens with 94, and the most common food allergen cited was milk, involved in 20. Fruit and vegetables were the most recalled category with 270. Nuts, nut products and seeds were the second most impacted with 150, and poultry meat was third with 101 events. Okay. We'll just pause again there just to see if there's any further questions that you have as we go through specifically on food and beverage. One question here, how might the CMA's recent report on the UK infant formula market impact manufacturers? So a really good question there. So there will likely be more labelling requirements and advertising restrictions coming. So the agency's recommendation to use unbranded infant formula in healthcare settings could be seen as a boost to smaller companies who lack that name recognition of the leading brands. So if, as is often the case, better known brands are used in hospitals, that can sway the buying decisions when you're at home as well. And I can see actually just quickly, we've got another question in from earlier on the automotive sector, asking if we can split the some of the statistics for injuries and how much is coming from EVs. So unfortunately, we don't have a breakdown specifically of what type of cars some of the recalls are coming from. Obviously, we can look at fire hazards and things like that, but we don't have the exact breakdown. That data isn't available to us on whether those are combustion engines or electric vehicles, unfortunately. Okay, I can see we've got a couple more questions coming in, but let's keep moving, Hannah, to medical device, and we'll try and come back to some of those a bit later on.
Okay, great. So as we move on to medical devices, let's test your knowledge. In January, the European Commission released a report on its international procurement instrument investigation in regards to Chinese public procurement practices for EU medical devices. The Commission found clear evidence of unfair and discriminatory actions and is contemplating its next steps. In contrast, between 2015 and 2023, by how much did Chinese exports of medical devices to the EU grow? Is it A, 1,250%, B, 875%, or C, 100%? Please make your selection on screen and we will confirm the answer shortly. So continuing on, digital mental health technologies can play a vital role in patients' health. To help manufacturers ensure they understand and comply with the relevant regulations, the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency published new guidance in February. It includes information on how to determine if a product qualifies as software as a medical device, among other topics. Accurately assessing a product's classification is essential so that manufacturers know which regulations they need to follow. A recent ruling by the Court of Justice of the European Union determined that a product that has been marketed as a medical device should instead be considered a medicinal product. This has wide implications for approvals, testing, and also marketing. Rachel, do you want to give the answer to our question and continue on with the medical sector?
Thank you, Hannah. So between 2015 and 2023, by how much did Chinese exports of medical devices into the EU grow? And the answer is 100%. So the Commission is saying that this surge illustrates the contrasting openness of the EU market compared to China. So just again, looking at the poll results, and we only have 19% of you got that one right. So moving on to the data. There were 815 EU and UK medical device recalls in Q1 of this year. That's down nearly 9% from 893 events in the Q4 of last year. Software concerns were the leading cause of European medical device recalls in Q1, with 134 events. Device failure was the second most cited issue, accounting for 103 recalls. And safety concerns impacted the third highest number of Q1 recalls, with 95 events. So if anyone has any questions about the medical device industry, please pop them in the chat now. We can go back to one, I think, from the previous sector. It was, would the HSE be involved in the recalls? So the UK HSEC is involved in recalls only when a product proposes a workplace health or safety risk. So typically that would involve anything, work equipment, machinery, or hazardous substances that would be used in occupational settings.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, keep your questions coming in there. We'll move over to the pharmaceutical sector now. So the UK has proposed revisions to its clinical trial regulations to encourage more companies to conduct clinical trials there. So the question that we've got for you today is, when was the last time the UK made substantial updates to its rules around clinical trials? Is it A, 15 years ago, B, 20 years ago, or C, 10 years ago? So the pharmaceutical sector is at risk from the threat of new US tariffs on imported products. Some EU manufacturers have expressed fears that drug companies might move their operations to the US to avoid heavy duties, which would be a blow to both the EU and UK, who are both trying to make their jurisdictions more attractive for drug manufacturing. The UK relaunched its innovative licensing and access pathway, or the ILAP, which was initially paused for review in November of 2024. The ILAP supports getting new medicines and drug device combinations to market sooner, and it gives medicine developers the coordinated access to the national health system, regulatory agency, and technology assessment bodies. The European Commission is working to increase pharmaceutical manufacturing, especially for critical medicines. It published its Critical Medicines Act proposal in March, and the measure is designed to reduce supply chain vulnerabilities by offering incentives to drug makers who operate in the EU. Okay, so let's quickly see how everyone got on in that pharmaceutical poll question. So the question was, when was the last time the UK made substantial updates to its rules around clinical trials? The answer was in fact B, 20 years ago. So the proposed changes are one of many steps that the UK government is implementing to increase the competitiveness of the UK pharmaceutical industry and ensure that UK patients have access to needed drugs and also attract more foreign companies. I'm just having a look at the results there. So 28% of you answered that one correctly, 42% of you went with just 10 years, and then 31% said 15 years. Okay, so Hannah, you've got some of the numbers.
Thank you, Chris. So in Q1 2025, there were 93 pharmaceutical recalls across the UK and EU. This is down by 8.8% compared to the 102 events in the previous quarter. Failed specifications was the leading cause of recalls with 19 events. Safety was second with 13 events this quarter. And the combination of foreign materials and contamination was third with 12 recalls in Q1. Now we can take any questions on the pharmaceutical industry. So if anyone has anything, do please pop it in the chat.
Thank you. I can't see any questions coming in specifically on the pharmaceutical sector just yet. Just looping back to a question from Brendan, when will the SPS agreement be effective in trade between the EU? So the SPS agreement continues to apply to UK-EU trade, but with important post-Brexit implications. But there were some further announcements yesterday. So it's kind of a watch this space, I think, at the moment, Brendan. We don't have too much more information on it just yet, as it's so new. But yeah, it's definitely one to watch at the moment. We've got another question here, specifically on pharma. So what are some of the incentives the EU is offering companies that produce critical medicines in the EU? So a good question there. It might mean that the company qualifies for easier access to funding. That's one option. They could also receive fast-tracked administrative or regulatory and scientific support, for strategic projects that are supporting EU manufacturing capacities for those critical medicines or their ingredients. One other thing is there are provisions to allow member states to use public procurement to diversify and incentivize the resilience of critical medicine supply chains.
Thanks, Chris. So we'll now move on to look at consumer products. First, we're going to discuss the regulatory changes for Q1 across the three cross-sector categories, which are AI and technology, sustainability, and markets and trade. Then we're going to look at recall trends for the consumer sector as a whole. And just a reminder, the full index also breaks down the recall data for electronics, toys, and clothing. So we would encourage you to download that full report if you're looking for that information. The complete product safety and recall index also has insights from our strategic partners about the impact of the new and proposed rules across the electronics, toys, and clothing industries.
Thanks, Rachel. So let's do our consumer products poll question. So in February, the European Commission introduced the Omnibus Simplification Package to streamline EU regulations and enhance competitiveness. So the proposal delays major reporting obligations, including those under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So the question is, if the package is approved, what percentage of companies would be removed from the scope of the directive? And your options are A, 20%, B, 80%, or C, 65%.
Okay, so moving on to AI and technology. Here are some of the regulatory highlights for Q1 related to AI and technology. In February, the Commission published a series of guidelines to help stakeholders understand their obligations under the AI Act. The documents provide additional information about actions that are prohibited under the new rule and the definition of an AI system. The UK government laid out its AI Opportunities Action Plan in January. Unlike the EU's risk-based approach, the UK government is giving the private sector and specific industries more freedom to drive innovation and adapt regulations to their needs. And more responsibility will be put on regulators in this instance. Rachel, I will hand over to you for markets and trades.
Thank you. So let's look at some of the key priorities in Q1 around markets and trade. Again, tariffs were a major focus of trade discussions in the first quarter. The US announced sweeping tariffs in several phases that might impact multiple industries and countries. In response, the UK government published a consultation on the impact of any future tariffs on UK imports from the US. EU member states approved their own slate of retaliatory tariffs on $23 billion of US goods, most of which were paused as the countries negotiate. So markets and supply chains are watching the situation closely. The European Commission has published its competitiveness compass. The plan is in response to the Draghi report findings last fall that the EU is falling behind other major economies. The initiative lays out specific steps to close the innovation gap, promote decarbonisation, and reduce excessive dependencies with a more diverse supply chain. The UK's Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act came into force in April, and this act greatly expands the Competition and Markets Authority power. The agency published several guidance documents in Q1 to offer information about its enforcement priorities and how it will interpret different obligations.
Thanks, Rachel. And now for our final area of regulatory changes, which is sustainability. So the EU's packaging and packaging waste regulation has entered into force. Companies have 18 months to implement the comprehensive requirements. The rule impacts the full life cycle of packaging, from the materials that are used to create it and how to dispose of or recycle used packaging. The UK's Climate Change Committee published its seventh carbon budget. The plan sets out legally binding carbon budgets as milestones to reach the government's goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And the report also analyses the current state of emissions and offers steps to take to reach that net zero target. Okay, so now the results of our final poll question of the day. So under the draft omnibus package, what percentage of companies would be removed from the scope of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive? The answer was in fact B, 80%. So the omnibus bill would delay compliance timelines for both the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It's tough to say. And I can see that 26% of you answered that one correctly. 48% of you actually went with the lower option of 20%, so higher than the most of you thought there.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Now let's look at the data across all the consumer goods industry for Q1. You can get more details on recall data for the clothing, toys and electronics sectors in the full report. Consumer product recalls across the EU and UK increased by 21.2% between Q4 and Q1. They rose to 1,527 events, which marks the highest number recorded in over a decade. The most prevalent consumer product risk in Q1 was chemical hazards, with 801 recalls. Environmental concerns were second, which were tied to 114 events. Choking was the third most common recall cause this quarter, which was cited in 108 incidents. Eau de toilette was the most common product impacted and was linked to 162 recalls. Perfume was the second most frequently recalled consumer product and tied to 100 recalls in this last quarter. And finally, lighting chains were third with 43 recalls.
Today's webinar has offered the highlights of Q1 recall data and regulatory changes. You can get a more detailed look in the full European Product Safety and Recall Index. We also provide in-depth insights from our strategic partners at global law firms, insurance companies, and regulatory and safety organizations. So these unbiased perspectives will be important as companies navigate comprehensive and sometimes overlapping regulations.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And then as a follow-up to today's presentation, we will email you the full digital version of the European Product Safety and Recall Index, so be sure to check your inbox following today's session. A reminder also to check out our interactive recall readiness audit that I mentioned earlier, so to get your company's personalized recall readiness score. So again, just simply scan the QR code on the screen now, or you can click on the link that we've just posted into the chat. Reminder also to have a listen to our US version. So the full report was published just last week, and that features some of our US legal and regulatory expert partners and some of their opinions and perspectives inside as well. We do have time for a couple of quick questions. If anyone does have anything else that they would like to raise, just pop it in the chat there. We did have one actually that we've missed earlier on medical devices. Question. So given the Court of Justice of the European Union steps to reclassify a product marketed as a medical device as a medicinal product, what steps should manufacturers take to protect themselves? A good question again. So the ruling involved a borderline product. So there can be some grey areas for these types of products. If you are a manufacturer, you need to be careful to evaluate your product's mode of action, since that was the primary factor that was used by the court. Incorrectly classifying a product can result in regulatory challenges or even market restrictions, and that can lead obviously to legal consequences as well. So hopefully that answers your question there. Okay. I can't see any other immediate questions coming in from the chat. So do feel free to reach out to myself or Hannah or Rachel following today's session. I'm happy to kind of speak to you directly if you have any questions specifically about any of the data or any of the other trends that we've mentioned today. But yeah, 32 minutes, quite a quick one today. We managed to fly through that one relatively quickly there. So thanks again to Hannah on your first index today, and thanks also to Rachel. Hope you found the information useful, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks very much.